Chapter 2 of Adversity and Faith. My mother was born the fourth child in a brood of 6 boys and girls. Her father was a lawyer in Pabna, now in Bangladesh. My third brother, Amitabh, often teased her about whether grandfather was really a lawyer or just a mukhtiar, a paralegal. She would refuse to be dragged into the affectionately irreverent conversation, maintaining steadfastly that he was indeed a lawyer. We have no way of knowing when she was born in 1916. My grandmother, Prafulla Devi, nicknamed her Anna Kali, a shortened form of Arna Kali, thereby inferring no more girls, please God. In Hindu culture, just as the male child is seen as a form of Krishna, the girl child is equated to the many forms of the mother goddess, one of them being Kali. Despite her devastating iconic imagery in most minds, in Bengal, Kali is seen as quite benign and even loving. Since my grandmother had enough children in my mother's name, she encapsulated her prayer that she should please be spared more girls. When mother was a 4-year-old, one day a horse drawn carriage stopped in front of the house and a few people brought down her father, who had collapsed at the courthouse. He was suffering from meningitis. In a matter of a few days, he died, leaving behind relatives who took away his property. His widow had to shave her head to bring to the notice of the entire world that she was dead for the purposes of the living. Her eldest son, barely out of his boyhood, yoked himself to pull the weight of a family of 7. Widows in India, in those days in particular, had to shave their head, wear white clothes, and abstain from all auspicious occasions, lest they bring bad luck. They had to give up non vegetarian food. Even onions and garlic were forbidden, as they were said to stir earthly desires. Adhering to many serpentine rituals, widows were expected to just wither away. For Prafulla Devi, that wasn't an option. She had to raise her brood. In any Bengali family, fish is a part of the staple diet. As a mother of 6, she had to cook fish for her children, even though she had to stop eating it herself. One day, her mother came on a visit and was shocked at what seemed to be her widowed daughter's total incontinence. She screamed and demanded that my grandmother stop cooking fish forthwith. My grandmother pleaded that she had to feed 6 children and for their sake she could not stop handling fish. The grand old lady would have none of that, accusing her daughter of having become a Christian, meaning a Christian, and threatened never to visit unless my grandmother vowed to live like a Brahmin widow. Prabhulla Devi's response was that visiting her daughter was a choice the matriarch had to make. She had to do what was right for her children. My great grandmother never visited her daughter again. Grandmother eventually left Pabna and with her children came to a town called Berhampur in the district of Murshidabad in West Bengal. In Bengal of the 1930s, it was not easy for women. Her eldest son had barely started working as a clerk to support the family, as the eldest male member, more out of a desire to protect his sisters than out of dogma. He insisted that they stop going to school. My grandmother threw a fit and insisted that girls continue their education. Consequently, my mother went on to complete high school. She grew up on a Hedy died of Bengali literature, music, and patriotism. As a schoolgirl, she learned to spin khadi as a symbol of self reliance preached by Mahatma Gandhi. When the legendary Subhash Chandra Bose quit the Indian National Congress to advocate armed struggle against the British, she garlanded him. Her upbringing in a traditional Bengali middle class ethos was also characterized by spirituality and a certain mysticism. She was a beautiful woman, pretty outside and very strong inside. When some people who knew both her and my father's family brokered a proposal for matrimony for the Mohitras, it was a match made in heaven. The Bagchis were relatively affluent. My father had a job with the king of then Kanal in Orissa. He spoke English like the British and was a very handsome man. The Moitras, in contrast, barely eked out a living. By the time my mother was of a marriageable age, another brother had become a clerk and an elder sister had just started teaching. They still did not own a house, and even though they never borrowed, they had nothing material to boast of. So, for them, the alliance was a blessing of God's. On an auspicious day, my father arrived with a small contingent of relatives, married, and took my brother to his parental house in Saraikela in today's Jharkhand, and from there she came to Denkanal in Orissa, transported to an alien land where she knew no one and did not speak the language. She came with the optimism that only a young bride is blessed with. Little did she know it would soon be tested because her husband, perfect in every other way, periodically suffered from manic depressive psychosis. MDP. Mental illness afflicts at least one in every 5 persons in some form or other, transitionally or otherwise. In a country like India, it is mostly caused by genetic factors. Some of its many manifestations are depression, bipolarity, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, and so on. Most are manageable with clinical treatment, family support, and patient's willpower. Many of the afflictions are caused by chemical imbalances that cause the brain to function abnormally. They are inherently physical disorders that are confused as mental illnesses and come with associated social stigma. In India, lack of awareness and education and even the absence of medically qualified doctors worsens the situation of such patients. Even today, there is only one psychiatrist per 1 million Indians. Back in the 1940s, the situation was grimmer. By the time my mother realized her husband's illness, she had already given birth to 3 boys in quick succession, one in 1942, the second in 1944, and the third in 1946. No one had told her about my father's illness before she married him. Even today, in many families, people push these things under the carpet in a don't ask, don't tell world. Again, young men and women, often with the serious mental health issues, are married off in the hope that a marital relationship will solve all the problems. For Lavanya Prabha, the door to the past was closed. With 3 sons, she could not go back to her brothers. They were ordinary people with little means. Her husband's family was sympathetic, but everyone was busy with their own lives. Although my father's manic depression used to surface once in every 10 years, it used to be severe enough for him to be taken to a mental asylum in Ranchi, where he was given electric convulsive therapy. Each time he would return to resume his role as the breadwinner of the family. A reticent man, he would become very assertive and garrulous during the episodes. He would try to do unusual things, forcing people to listen to what he had to say. There was an unfamiliar air of aggression about him during these times. With age, the frequency of the episodes increased. I had no knowledge of my father's illness till I was 8 years old. That was when he was hospitalized for the last time. Until then, I had never known him as anything other than an affectionate, doting man who made it clear to me and to others around that I was his child prodigy, someone very special. My elder brothers, though, had known of it, and mother sent them telegrams to come and take him to hospital. My mother called me aside and explained, just as we all get physically unwell, sometimes people can get mentally unwell too. It is another medical condition. Your father will soon be perfectly all right. We have to send him for treatment. You have to give him time. Just make sure you do not bother him. Somehow things always worked out the way she said they would, and after his treatment, he came back the father I had always known. I often wonder where would we all have been if my mother had not taken charge at this tipping point of her life when she realized her husband's medical problem for the first time. What would have happened if she had failed to come to terms with the situation and had caved in? Where would we be today if the family had gone into denial nearly 6 decades after? Even today, it is amazing how pervasive that denial is in suffering individuals with unquiet minds and their families who prefer the shroud of secrecy to seeking expert help. Lavanya Prabha was not a woman to either be helpless or blame others for her situation in life. I have never heard her recount her early life with my father with any despair. She gave him all the respect that was due to a husband and a provider. Though my father and my mother were temperamentally very different, they were bound by a very visible value system that glorified education, hard work, simplicity, and honest living. She let him do his work in the service of the state as though he was next only to the Governor General of India. His demands were non existent, except for a steady supply of good tea and a packet of cigarettes. Whatever mother cooked, he ate with contentment. He never touched alcohol, seldom socialized outside of work. He brought her a paltry sum of money at the end of the month, and she took pride in the fact that the household never spent beyond its means. She moved with him from place to place without complaint, often undertaking hazardous journey, traveling through the night in remote areas. As a magistrate in Denkanal district, my father was required to tour the interiors, sometimes on a bicycle. He would be away for many days at a time. Those were the days without telephones, electricity, and automobiles in most parts of India. Mother had to look after the house and manage the 3 older boys all by herself. One night in Parjang, as she slept with her boys, a pack of bears descended, and for hours they stood by the windows trying to break them. All she could do was hold her babies to her bosom and pray. More than once it seemed that the windows would give way, but finally her prayers were heeded. The bears went away. Every time the family moved, the household effects fitted neatly into a trolley attached to a government jeep requisitioned for the purpose. As soon as we arrived at our destination, mother would send us to look for 3 bricks. While we were off getting the bricks, she would dig some fresh dirt and affectionately make mud out of it. When we brought back the bricks, she would build a chulha, an earthen stove, layering the bricks with the mud. In no time, 3 simple bricks and some mud would take the beautiful shape of a stove. She would then make some tea for everyone nearby, indicating the hearth of the home was set up and that she was ready to cook and feed all of us. She took immense pride in her ability to build the nicest chulha that would last her until it was time to move again. She made friends with neighbors. She had no time for gossip but was always at hand to help them. People came to take her advice. Her curries were sent to other people's home and their food came to ours. In transferable government jobs, you can often be sent to places without knowing whether there is a good house, a good school, or basic medical amenities in that place. When I see how much time government servants spend lobbying to land the right posting or move heaven and earth so they can stay away from a bad posting, my parents appear as aliens to me. They moved when told, no questions asked. When my father was posted to Anthamalik, the only government quarter available was next to the morgue, where dead bodies were brought for postmortem. Apart from the ghastly sight of a dead body arriving, often parts of the dissected anatomy would be strewn around after the postmortem had been done, while digging the earth in her own courtyard to plant saplings. My mother would chance upon what looked like human bones, but what my mother dreaded most was the unbridled enthusiasm with which her 3 little boys would peer through the window whenever cops arrived. That scared her. Helpless, she would pray. Over time, something interesting started to happen. The day a corpse was to arrive for postmortem, she would invariably see an apparition while saying her daily morning prayers on cue. She would shut the boys inside the house. The same afternoon, she would hear the familiar sounds signaling activity in the morgue. People build conviction in their God when confronted with miracles. She grew more steadfast in her faith with each adversity. When I was 4 or 5 years old, it became apparent to me that she could not see very well. She used to ask me to help her with threading the needle whenever she needed to mend an old garment. Her gradual loss of sight had started long before I was born. Apparently, she had developed early signs of a cataract. Once you develop cataract, you have to wait until it matures before it can be removed, and in those days it required an arduous surgery at a hospital in some big city with many weeks of post operative care. My mother had to wait decades for her surgery till the cataract matured in one eye and then after many months in the other eye. As a result of her blurred vision, she could not read very well. She would ask me to read the daily newspaper to her. India was at war with Pakistan and she wanted to know every small detail of what was going on. As an 8-year-old, I was happy to read out loud stories of Indian tanks mowing down the enemy, our bombers breaking up supply lines by bombing out railway bridges and our fighters downing enemy planes. Eyes closed, she would listen, occasionally crying for the fallen and cheering for the brave soldiers of the nation. When father retired from government service, Dadamuni took charge of the entire household. We acquired basic material comforts. For the first time in my life, I had a wooden cot to sleep on. A table with two chairs were made for Aurobindoda and me to study. A sofa arrived in the living room, and my second brother, Shanti Sharoop, brought home a transistor radio from the Air Force canteen. Amidst all this, mother received her eldest daughter-in-law. This was also the time when she was taken for her cataract operation all the way to the eye hospital Tata Steel ran in Jamshedpur. It was the longest I had stayed away from her. I did not mind the separation because soon she would be able to see. After weeks, she finally returned and seeing me, exclaimed how fair I was. She had never seen me without the haze in her eye. Even today, I blush at the thought of her exclamation. It remains the biggest compliment any woman has ever given me. When the cataract in her other eye matured, she was taken to an eye camp organized in a nearby mining township. Again, I was left at home and prayed that she would return soon. When she did, she had to undergo weeks of post-operative care. During the cataract operation, the doctors had noticed a small mark in one of the eyes but did not think much of it, suggesting it may just be harmless. It was actually an ulcer, and it burst in her eye during the post-operative period. When the bandage was finally removed and my mother was asked to check her vision, she walked into a flower bed she and I had planted together. It had bloomed in a riotous color. It became clear to everyone that she was now blind in both eyes. The first task for her was to learn to take care of herself. She learned that slowly but surely, combing her own hair, bathing herself, changing clothes, then cleaning her own room, and finally returning to the kitchen. This time only to cut the vegetables or knead the dough. When she knew that her blindness was irreversible, she stopped praying for herself, but she prayed more than ever before. For now she had to pray for the whole world. Many years later, when Shushmita and I made our home, she came to live with us. My time with her used to be when I had my evening tea after work. She would listen intently to the day's events. As Sushmita and I talked, she had the power to comprehend a world so different from hers, a world separated by many walls, including her loss of sight and only a high school education. But she could effortlessly scale those walls, and I realize today that our ability to connect and comprehend is not so much a function of our education. Human potential is infinite, and the fundamental requirement is not intellect but inclusion. She lived a life in which everything, just everything, belonged to her. She was life itself. The world is not divided between the living and the dead. There is no difference between what is animate and what is inanimate. She once told me during our tea time conversation, Shabdo, sound, is Brahma, life. She added, sensing that I was unable to comprehend. She knocked the surface of the dining table twice gently and asked, where did the sound emanate from? Was it just my hand? No, it was the table replying to my knock. If I were to knock on any other surface, The sound will be very different, varied each time. It is the way the seemingly inanimate world speaks to you. There is Brahma in everything. As long as you are willing to knock, even the inanimate will respond each time without fail. Where there is Shabdo, there is Brahma. Animate and inanimate are distinction born of perception. In reality, everything is living. What did she experience with her two eyes that were open but had no vision in them? Did she only see darkness? No, she had told me, I only see light, infinite light. Our vision is not always a function of our capability to see. It is our willingness to open up our inner eye to the limitless universe that lights up the path of our existence.